Imagine being told you can't walk on your own lawn by someone who isn't even the police. Yeah, that actually happened to me. And let me tell you, it was one of the wildest HOA confrontations this neighborhood has ever seen. Now, I've been living in this neighborhood for quite some time. It's one of those places with manicured lawns, mailboxes that match, and neighbors who wave as they jog by with their perfectly groomed dogs. Peaceful, right? Well, that's what I thought too, until Karen moved in. You know the type, clipboard in hand, always peeking through the blinds, and treating the HOA rulebook like it's her personal Bible. But let me back up a bit. It was a sunny Tuesday morning, the kind of day that makes you want to step outside, breathe in the fresh air, and enjoy your own little slice of suburbia. So that's exactly what I did. I grabbed my coffee, put on my old sneakers, and decided to take a stroll around my front lawn. Nothing fancy, just me appreciating my own property. As I was minding my business, admiring how well my azaleas were coming in this season, I heard it, that unmistakable throat-clearing sound. You know the one, the kind that says, "Excuse me, but I'm about to ruin your perfectly good day." I turned around, and there she was, Karen, with her signature oversized sunglasses and that infamous scowl plastered across her face. She stood at the edge of my lawn, arms crossed like she was about to deliver a court summons. "Good morning, Karen," I said, trying to be polite. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" She didn't respond to my pleasantries. Instead, she pointed at my feet. "You can't do that," she declared. I blinked, confused. "Do what?" "Walk on the grass like that," she huffed, as though I'd just committed a felony. Now, I'm a reasonable man. I've dealt with my fair share of quirky neighbors over the years. But this was a new level of absurd. "Karen," I said slowly, "this is my lawn. I'm pretty sure I can walk on it." She shook her head vigorously. "Actually, according to HOA guidelines, grass needs to be maintained in pristine condition. Foot traffic can damage it, and we can't have that bringing down property values." I stared at her, wondering if she was serious. Spoiler alert, she absolutely was. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've lived here for years. I think I know how to take care of my lawn." But she wasn't backing down. "Well, maybe that's how things used to be, but not anymore. As a member of the HOA Compliance Committee, it's my duty to enforce the rules." Oh, great. She'd given herself a promotion to neighborhood sheriff. I took a deep breath. "Karen, with all due respect, you don't have the authority to tell me what I can or can't do on my own property." She pursed her lips. "We'll see about that," she said ominously. And with that, she marched off, her sneakers crunching dramatically on the sidewalk. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it. Just a weird encounter with an overzealous neighbor, right? Wrong. Karen wasn't done with me yet. The very next day, I received an official-looking letter in my mailbox. It was from the HOA, or rather from Karen acting on behalf of the HOA Compliance Committee. The letter stated that I was in violation of HOA Regulation 14B, preservation of lawn integrity, and that continued infractions could result in fines. I couldn't believe it. A fine? For walking on my own lawn? I decided it was time to take action. First, I double-checked the HOA rulebook. And surprise, surprise, there was no such regulation about a preservation of lawn integrity. Karen had made the whole thing up. Armed with this knowledge, I called up the HOA president, a reasonable guy named Tom. I explained the situation, and to his credit, he was just as baffled as I was. "She said what?" Tom asked, incredulous. "She's trying to fine me for walking on my own lawn," I repeated. Tom sighed. "I'll talk to her," he promised. But Karen wasn't the type to back down quietly. A few days later, she was back at it, clipboard in hand, taking photos of my lawn like she was gathering evidence for a criminal trial. I decided enough was enough. If Karen wanted a showdown, I was ready to give her one. Karen's power trip was just getting started. After failing to intimidate me with her bogus HOA rule enforcement, she decided to double down on her antics. The very next day, as I was out front minding my own business, I saw Karen pacing back and forth in front of her house, phone pressed firmly to her ear. Her gestures were wild and animated, like she was giving some poor soul on the other end a piece of her mind. Curiosity got the better of me, so I kept a discreet eye on her. A few minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up to the curb. My jaw practically hit the ground. Had she actually called the cops? The officer stepped out of the car, looking slightly bewildered. I can only imagine the call he received. "We've got a man walking on his own lawn. Send backup." Karen, however, looked completely justified in her decision to involve law enforcement. She marched right up to the officer, clipboard in hand, and started explaining her version of events. I couldn't hear everything she was saying, but I caught snippets like persistent violations and disrupting community standards. The officer glanced over at me, Clearly trying to suppress a smile, I decided it was time to step in. "Officer," I said, walking up to them. "Is there a problem?" Karen jumped in before he could respond. "Yes, there is. This man refuses to comply with HOA regulations. He's walking all over the grass, damaging property values, and blatantly disregarding community standards." The officer looked at me, then back at Karen. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm not sure this is really a police matter." Karen's face turned red. "But it is. He's breaking the rules." The officer sighed. "HOA rules aren't laws, ma'am. This sounds like a civil matter. Maybe you should take it up with the HOA board." Karen looked absolutely scandalized. But he's ruining everything." The officer gave me a sympathetic look. "Sir, I'm sorry to bother you. Have a good day." And just like that, he got back in his cruiser and drove off, leaving Karen fuming on the sidewalk. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Better luck next time, Karen," I said as I walked back toward my house. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. Karen was on a mission. And it didn't take long for her to up the ante. The very next morning, I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I saw her approaching, clipboard tucked firmly under her arm, her face set in a look of grim determination. "Mr. Smith," she called out, her voice carrying that unmistakable tone of self-importance. "I need to speak with you." I set my coffee down and walked to the edge of my porch. "What is it now, Karen?" "You're still in violation of HOA Regulation 14B, she declared. "We've been through this," I reminded her. "That rule doesn't exist," she sniffed. "Maybe not in the old version of the rulebook, but we're in the process of updating it." I crossed my arms. "You can't enforce a rule that doesn't exist, Karen." She looked genuinely offended, as though I'd just questioned her authority as neighborhood queen. "You leave me no choice," she said dramatically. "I'll have to involve law enforcement." I blinked. "Law enforcement? For walking on my own lawn?" She nodded solemnly, as though this was a perfectly reasonable course of action. "You're disturbing the peace and damaging community property values." It took everything in me not to burst out laughing. Instead, I said calmly, "Go ahead, Karen. Call the cops. Let's see how that plays out." And to my absolute astonishment, she did. I had enough of Karen's antics. My response set the stage for a neighborhood showdown that left everyone talking. With the support of the community, we faced Karen head-on and reclaimed the peace in our neighborhood. Karen's blatant abuse of her so-called HOA power reached a tipping point, and it was time for me to respond decisively. I couldn't just sit back and let her keep harassing me and my neighbors, so I decided to gather some community support and confront her head-on. The first step was a neighborhood meeting. I reached out to Tom, the HOA president, and suggested organizing an open forum for residents to voice their concerns. To my surprise, Tom was fully on board. "It's about time we cleared the air," he agreed. "Karen's been causing a lot of tension." Word spread quickly, and before I knew it, nearly every homeowner on the block was eager to attend. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in the local community center. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Finally, we had a chance to address Karen's antics as a united front. As the meeting began, Tom stood up and welcomed everyone. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "We're here today to discuss some recent issues affecting our neighborhood, particularly concerns about HOA compliance and enforcement." The room buzzed with murmurs. People were clearly eager to speak their minds. I was the first to take the floor. "Look," I began, "I'm not here to cause drama, but things have gotten out of hand. We all want to live peacefully and enjoy our homes without unnecessary interference." A few heads nodded in agreement. I continued. "Karen's attempt to fine me for walking on my own lawn was just the tip of the iceberg. I know others have had similar experiences." That's when the floodgates opened. One neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stood up. "She told me I couldn't put up holiday decorations because they were too bright." "Who decides that?" Another neighbor, Paul, chimed in. "She made me repaint my fence because it was one shade off from the approved color." One shade. The stories kept coming, each more ridiculous than the last. Karen's power trip had clearly affected everyone. Tom finally intervened. "It's clear that we need to address this. Karen's role on the compliance committee was never meant to give her unchecked authority." That's when Karen, who had been sitting silently in the back, decided to speak up. "I'm just trying to uphold the standards of this neighborhood," she said defensively. "If we let things slide, property values will plummet." I couldn't hold back. "Karen, there's a difference between maintaining standards and micromanaging people's lives. We all care about this neighborhood, but that doesn't mean we need to live under constant scrutiny." The room erupted in applause. Tom stepped in again. "Here's what we're going to do," he announced. "We're revising the HOA guidelines to make them clearer and fairer, and from now on, no one person will have the authority to enforce rules on their own. The sense of relief in the room was palpable. People were smiling, nodding, and thanking Tom for taking action. But Karen wasn't done yet. "You'll all regret this," she muttered as she stormed out of the room. I couldn't help but smile. The neighborhood had finally stood up to Karen, and we were better off for it. The showdown had brought us closer together as a community, and we were ready to move forward. Without the constant interference of a self-appointed HOA cop, Karen was relentless. But nothing prepared me for what came next. Her attempt to stage an arrest on my lawn became the talk of the town. Neighbors gathered, phones recorded, and I stood my ground, ready to expose her antics for what they truly were. Karen's reign as the self-appointed HOA cop finally came to an end, but not without some dramatic twists and turns. After weeks of tension, heated debates, and one unforgettable HOA meeting, justice was finally served. The neighborhood buzzed with the fallout of Karen's antics. Some neighbors were sympathetic toward her. Others were just relieved to see her back down. But for me, the most satisfying part was knowing that I'd stood my ground and exposed her for what she was, a meddling neighbor with a thirst for control. Word spread quickly about what happened. People couldn't believe the lengths Karen had gone to in her quest for HOA dominance. Some even joked that she'd probably try to run for HOA president next. As for me, I went back to enjoying my lawn on my terms. I walked, I gardened, and I even hosted a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the return of peace. The HOA president, Tom, made sure to clarify the rules moving forward, so no one else would fall victim to bogus fines or power-hungry neighbors. And Karen, well, let's just say she learned a valuable lesson about respecting other people's property and boundaries. She kept a much lower profile after that, and the neighborhood was better for it. In the end, this whole ordeal taught me one important thing. Sometimes, you have to stand up to the Karens of the world, even if it's just to protect your right to walk on your own lawn.